The fluorescent lights above my hospital bed buzzed with that familiar medical facility hum as I slowly opened my eyes, expecting to feel the dull ache where my gallbladder used to be. Instead, a sharp pain radiated from the left side of my abdomen, nowhere near where it should have been. Something was terribly wrong. My name is Catherine Parker. I'm 47 years old, and what happened to me in that operating room 3 days ago would shake my faith in everything I thought I could trust. This story, and it changed the course of my week, then my life. If you want more stories like this, please subscribe and hit that like button. Where are you watching from? The recovery room smelled of antiseptic and that peculiar hospital air that never quite feels fresh. My husband, David Parker, sat in the uncomfortable vinyl chair beside my bed, his usually neat brown hair disheveled from running his hands through it. At 52, David had always been my rock, the steady presence who held our family together through 23 years of marriage. His green eyes, normally bright with humor, were clouded with worry as he leaned forward. "Catherine, honey, how are you feeling?" he asked, his voice gentle but strained. I could see the exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes. He'd been here since my surgery began, probably surviving on nothing but vending machine coffee and anxiety. "Different than I expected," I admitted, pressing my hand gently against the bandages. "David, this doesn't feel right. The pain is in completely the wrong place." Dr. Marcus Webb entered the room with his usual confident stride, clipboard in hand and that practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. At 58, Dr. Webb had been our family physician for over a decade, the man who'd delivered our youngest daughter and guided us through countless medical decisions. His silver hair was perfectly styled despite the early morning hour, and his expensive suit suggested someone who'd built quite a reputation in our small town of Millbrook. "Good morning, Catherine. I trust you're feeling better after the procedure?" His tone was professional, almost dismissive, as he glanced at his notes rather than making eye contact. Something in his demeanor felt off. This was the same Dr. Webb who usually spent time explaining every detail, who made jokes to put us at ease, who treated David and me like family rather than just another case number. "Dr. Webb, I need to understand something," I said, struggling to sit up straighter despite the pain. "The incision site doesn't match what you described before surgery. You said the gallbladder removal would be on my right side, but this is clearly on my left." Dr. Webb's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Post-surgical discomfort can be confusing, Catherine. The body processes pain in unexpected ways. I assure you, everything went according to plan." David stood up from his chair, his protective instincts kicking in. "She's not confused, Marcus. We've been friends for years, and I know when my wife is asking legitimate questions. Can you show us the surgical notes?" The tension in the room grew thick. Dr. Webb's usual warmth had completely disappeared, replaced by something that felt almost hostile. "The surgical notes are confidential medical documents. I don't appreciate having my professional judgment questioned by people without medical training." Later that afternoon, my best friend Linda Morrison arrived with a bouquet of sunflowers and her trademark no-nonsense attitude. At 45, Linda had been my closest confidant since we met at our daughter's soccer games 8 years ago. Her curly red hair bounced as she walked, and her freckled face usually lit up any room she entered. But today, even her natural optimism couldn't mask the concern in her brown eyes. "Catherine, you look terrible," she said, settling into the chair David had vacated to grab lunch. Linda never sugarcoated anything, which was exactly why I needed her here. "David called me last night, said something was bothering you about the surgery." "Linda, I think they removed the wrong organ," I whispered, glancing toward the door to make sure no one was listening. "The pain, the location, even Dr. Webb's behavior. Nothing adds up." Linda's expression grew serious, As a nurse practitioner at the county clinic, she understood medical procedures better than most. "Tell me exactly what you're experiencing." I described the pain, the unexpected incision site, and Dr. Webb's evasive answers. Linda listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed her medical background. "Catherine, I hate to say this, but your instincts might be right. Surgical errors happen more often than hospitals want to admit. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" That evening, David returned with Chinese takeout and a determined expression. "I've been thinking about what happened with Dr. Webb today. In all the years we've known him, he's never been dismissive or secretive. Something's not right." "I agree," I said, picking at the lo mein he'd brought. "But how do we prove it? He has all the medical records, all the authority. Who's going to believe us over a respected surgeon?" "We start by getting copies of your medical records," David said firmly. "It's your legal right as a patient. Then we have Linda review them with her medical expertise." The next morning, Linda arrived early with coffee and a manila folder. Her expression was grim as she sat down beside my bed. "I did some research last night," she began carefully. "Catherine, there have been 3 malpractice settlements involving Dr. Webb in the past 5 years. All sealed by the court, but the information is public record if you know where to look." My heart sank. The man we'd trusted with our family's health, who'd been a guest at our dinner table, had a history of problems we'd never known about. "There's more," Linda continued. "I called in a favor with a friend who works in medical records. Your surgical consent form shows authorization for gallbladder removal, but the actual procedure coded in the system is for spleen removal." David's face went pale. "They removed her spleen instead of her gallbladder?" "It looks that way. And Catherine, without your spleen, you're at serious risk for infections. You'll need lifelong medical monitoring and preventive care that Dr. Webb hasn't even mentioned." The weight of the situation hit me like a physical blow. Not only had they performed the wrong surgery, but they were covering it up, leaving me vulnerable to health complications I didn't even know about. "We need to confront him," I said, anger finally overriding my shock. "He can't just pretend this didn't happen." But what I discovered next was a small detail that blew the whole thing open. The next morning, I insisted on getting dressed and going to the hospital myself. David protested, worried about my recovery, but I couldn't lie in bed another day knowing what I knew. Linda drove us, her knuckles white against the steering wheel as we navigated the familiar route to St. Mary's. The hospital lobby felt different now. The polished floors and cheerful artwork that once seemed comforting now felt like a facade hiding dangerous secrets. My incision throbbed with each step, a constant reminder of what had been taken from me without my knowledge. At the medical records office, a tired-looking clerk handed me the forms to request my files. "It'll take 3 to 5 business days," she said without looking up. "I need them today," I replied firmly. "It's an urgent medical matter." Something in my tone made her glance up. She studied my face for a moment, perhaps recognizing the desperation there, then sighed. "I'll see what I can do. Have a seat." We waited in the sterile hallway, David pacing while Linda sat rigid beside me. The antiseptic smell that had once meant healing now made my stomach churn. Other patients walked by, trusting and hopeful, just as I had been a week ago. When the clerk finally returned with a thick folder, my hands shook as I accepted it. "Thank you," I whispered, clutching the papers that might finally give us answers. Back in Linda's car, we spread the documents across the dashboard. Linda's medical training allowed her to decipher what looked like hieroglyphics to David and me. Her face grew increasingly pale as she read. "Catherine, this is worse than I thought," she said quietly. According to this operative report, Dr. Webb noted during surgery that your gallbladder appeared healthy. But he proceeded to remove your spleen instead, citing what he calls unexpected findings. What kind of unexpected findings? David demanded. Linda's voice was barely audible. There aren't any details. It's almost like he's documenting a cover story. The betrayal cut deeper than any surgical incision. Dr. Webb hadn't just made a mistake. He had deliberately misled us about what happened. The man who had delivered our children, who had sat at our kitchen table sharing stories about his own family, had violated our trust in the most fundamental way possible. We have to go to his office, I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. Right now, before he has time to prepare more lies. The medical building adjacent to the hospital felt like enemy territory as we rode the elevator to the 3rd floor. My legs felt unsteady, whether from the surgery or the emotional weight of what we were about to do. I couldn't tell. David's hand found mine, his palm damp with perspiration. Dr. Webb's waiting room was exactly as I remembered. Tasteful beige walls lined with his diplomas and awards, soft classical music playing overhead. The receptionist smiled warmly at us, clearly not expecting the confrontation that was about to unfold. We need to see Dr. Webb immediately, I announced, my voice carrying across the quiet space. I'm sorry, but he's with a patient. If you'd like to schedule an appointment, tell him Catherine is here with her medical records, Linda interrupted, stepping forward with an authority that brooked no argument. Tell him we'll wait. The receptionist's smile faltered as she picked up the phone. We heard her whispered conversation, saw the confusion cross her face as she listened to whatever Dr. Webb was telling her. He'll be right out, she said finally, her professional demeanor now tinged with uncertainty. We didn't have to wait long. Dr. Webb emerged from his office, his usually confident stride replaced by something more cautious. His eyes immediately went to the folder in my hands, and I saw something flicker across his face. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. Catherine, David, what a surprise. How are you feeling? The casual tone, the practiced smile, the complete absence of any acknowledgement of what he'd done, it all crystallized my anger into something sharp and focused. We know what you did, I said simply, holding up the medical records. We know you removed my spleen instead of my gallbladder. The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might collapse. His mouth opened and closed wordlessly, and for the first time since I'd known him, Dr. Webb looked exactly like what he was. A man who had been caught in a terrible lie. I think we should discuss this in my office, he said quietly, glancing around at the other patients who had begun to stare. But as we followed him down the hallway, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On his desk, partially hidden beneath other papers, was a document with a law firm's letterhead. And at the top, I could just make out the words that one small detail blew the whole thing open. The words on that letterhead hit me like a physical blow. Malpractice insurance claim, Webb, Thomas M. Even upside down and partially obscured, I could make out enough to understand what I was seeing. He had already contacted his insurance company. He knew exactly what he had done, and he had been preparing for this moment. My hands began to shake as we settled into the chairs across from his desk. The office that had once felt like a sanctuary of healing now felt suffocating, the walls seeming to close in around us. Every diploma, every award, every carefully placed photo of Dr. Webb with smiling patients now felt like props in an elaborate deception. Catherine, I want you to know that your surgery was successful, Dr. Webb began, his voice taking on that patronizing tone doctors use when they think you won't understand the complexities of medicine. Your recovery has been excellent, and… Stop. The word came out sharper than I intended, cutting through his rehearsed speech. Just stop with the lies. We have the pathology report. We have the surgical notes. We know you removed my spleen, not my gallbladder. Dr. Webb's facade crumbled completely. His shoulders sagged, and for a moment, he looked like a broken man, rather than the confident surgeon who had assured me everything would be fine. But then, I saw something else in his expression, something calculating, and I realized he was still trying to find a way out of this. There were complications during the surgery, he said carefully, each word measured. Sometimes we have to make difficult decisions in the moment to preserve the patient's life. The spleen was damaged, and… That's not what the surgical notes say. David's voice was deadly quiet. My husband, who had spent years avoiding confrontation, who had always deferred to medical professionals, was staring down this man who had violated our trust so completely. The notes indicate a routine removal. No mention of complications. No mention of life-threatening decisions. I watched Dr. Webb's face as he processed the fact that we weren't going to accept his explanations. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of his deception and our growing understanding of just how deep this betrayal went. My gallbladder is still in there, isn't it? I asked, though I already knew the answer. You left the diseased organ that was actually causing my pain, and you took out a healthy organ instead. The admission, when it finally came, was barely a whisper. Yes. The simple word hung in the air like a death sentence. All those weeks of wondering why I still felt the same pain, why the surgery hadn't provided the relief Dr. Webb had promised, why something felt fundamentally wrong with my body. It all made horrible sense now. Linda leaned forward in her chair, her voice tight with controlled fury. Do you understand what you've done? Do you comprehend the magnitude of this mistake? It was an error in judgment, Dr. Webb said, and I could hear him retreating into medical jargon, trying to minimize what had happened. These things can happen in complex surgical situations. Complex? I stood up so quickly that my chair scraped against the floor. You told me this was routine. You said it was a simple procedure. You made me sign consent forms for gallbladder removal, not spleen removal. The adrenaline coursing through my system was making my surgical site ache, but I didn't care. Months of pain, months of confusion, months of feeling like something was wrong with my own body while being told I was healing perfectly. It was all because this man had made a catastrophic mistake and then covered it up. What happens now? David asked, and I could hear the tremor in his voice that meant he was fighting to stay calm. What's the plan to fix this? Dr. Webb looked down at his hands, and when he spoke, his words sent ice through my veins. The spleen removal, it can't be reversed. And another surgery to remove the gallbladder now would be… He trailed off, but the implication was clear. I would need another surgery, more recovery time, more risk, all because he had been too proud or too scared to admit his mistake when it happened. You were going to let me live with this pain forever, weren't you? The realization hit me with stunning clarity. You were going to let me think the surgery didn't work, that I was somehow defective, rather than admit what you had done. The document on his desk seemed to mock us with its presence. He had known this day would come, had been preparing his legal defense while I suffered in ignorance. The betrayal felt even deeper than the medical error itself. But as I stood there, looking down at this man who had held my life in his hands and failed me so completely, I felt something unexpected rising within me. Not just anger, though that was certainly there, but a fierce determination. He had taken something from me, but he hadn't broken me. "We're going to make this right," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we're going to make sure this never happens to anyone else." Dr. Webb looked up at me then, and I saw fear in his eyes. Real, genuine fear. Because he was finally beginning to understand that we weren't going to quietly disappear, weren't going to accept his explanations, and move on with our lives. But as I reached for the door handle, ready to leave his office and begin the fight for justice, Dr. Webb spoke one more time. "Catherine, wait. There's something else you need to know about your case. Something about why this happened in the first place." My hand froze on the door handle. The room seemed to shrink around us, the air growing thick and oppressive. David's sharp intake of breath echoed my own shock. After everything Dr. Webb had already revealed, the idea that there was more, something deeper and more sinister about what had happened to me, felt almost impossible to process. "Sit down, Catherine. Please." Dr. Webb's voice had changed again, losing even the pretense of professional composure. Now he just sounded tired, defeated, like a man who had been carrying a weight too heavy for far too long. I turned slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. David immediately moved to my side, his hand finding my elbow to guide me back to the chair. The simple gesture grounded me, reminded me that whatever Dr. Webb was about to reveal, I wouldn't have to face it alone. "What could possibly be worse than what you've already told us?" David's voice was tight with controlled fury. "What else could there be?" Dr. Webb opened his desk drawer and pulled out another folder, this one thicker than the legal documents he'd shown us earlier. His hands shook slightly as he placed it on the desk between us. The manila folder was worn at the edges, as if it had been handled many times, opened and closed in moments of private torment. "The morning of your surgery, Catherine, I received some personal news that—" He stopped, rubbing his face with both hands. "My wife had been in a car accident, a serious one. The hospital called me just as I was preparing to scrub in for your procedure." The room fell silent except for the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. I stared at Dr. Webb, trying to process what he was telling me. David's hand found mine, his fingers intertwining with mine in a grip that was both protective and seeking comfort. "I should have postponed your surgery," Dr. Webb continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I should have called in another surgeon, should have rescheduled everything. But I convinced myself that I could compartmentalize, that I could focus on the task at hand despite what was happening with Margaret." Margaret. His wife had a name, had been a real person fighting for her life while he stood over my unconscious body with a scalpel. The human dimension of his failure hit me like a physical blow, complicating the clean narrative of anger I'd been building in my mind. "She died while you were in recovery," he said, and the words fell into the room like stones into still water. "I was reviewing your post-operative notes when the call came. She never regained consciousness after the accident." I felt David's grip tighten on my hand. The revelation explained so much, and yet made everything infinitely more complex. Dr. Webb hadn't just made a medical error. He had been operating while his world was falling apart, had been trying to save my life while his wife was dying in another hospital across town. "That doesn't excuse what happened," I said finally, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Your personal tragedy doesn't make what you did to me acceptable. No, it doesn't. Dr. Webb looked up at me then, and I saw something I hadn't expected in his eyes. Gratitude. Thank you for saying that, for not letting me use Margaret's death as an excuse. Because that's what I've been doing for months, telling myself that grief justified everything that came after. He opened the folder and spread several documents across the desk. Medical records, incident reports, correspondence with the hospital administration, the paper trail of a cover-up that had grown larger and more elaborate with each passing day. After I realized what I had done, after I understood the magnitude of my mistake, I panicked. The hospital was already dealing with the liability issues from Margaret's accident, questions about why I had been allowed to operate while distracted. If they had discovered that I had also removed the wrong organ from a patient, he gestured helplessly at the documents. I convinced myself that I was protecting everyone, the hospital, my career, even you, by avoiding a lawsuit that would have dragged on for years. You were protecting yourself, David said bluntly. Don't dress it up as some noble sacrifice. You were covering your own mistakes and letting Catherine suffer because it was easier than facing the consequences. Dr. Webb nodded slowly, accepting the harsh truth of David's words. You're right. I was a coward. I am a coward. And every day that I let pass without telling you the truth, I became more entrenched in the lie, more convinced that I had gone too far to turn back. I studied the documents spread across his desk, trying to make sense of the medical terminology and administrative codes. One report caught my attention, a quality assurance review that had been filed but apparently never acted upon. Someone else in the hospital had suspected something was wrong with my case. Dr. Martinez, I said, reading the signature at the bottom of the report. She knew something was off about my surgery, didn't she? Dr. Webb's face went pale. Elena has been asking questions for weeks. She's the one who finally convinced me that I had to tell you the truth. She said she would go to the administration herself if I didn't come clean. So there had been someone looking out for me, someone in the medical system who had noticed the inconsistencies and refused to let them slide. Dr. Martinez had been the catalyst that finally forced this confession, the person who had made it impossible for Dr. Webb to continue his deception. I want to meet with her, I said suddenly. I want to hear what she suspected, and when she suspected it. Catherine, I don't think that's wise. I don't care what you think is wise. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't apologize. You forfeited any right to advise me on what's best for my health or my well-being. Dr. Martinez tried to help me when you were busy protecting yourself. I want to thank her. David squeezed my hand, a silent show of support that gave me strength to continue. What's going to happen now? To your license? To your career? To the hospital's liability in all of this? Dr. Webb looked down at the scattered papers, the evidence of his professional and personal failures spread out like a judgment. I've already submitted my resignation. The medical board will conduct their own investigation once I file the required reports. As for the hospital, he shrugged, a gesture of defeat. That's out of my hands now. The weight of what he was telling me settled over the room like a heavy blanket. His career was over, his reputation destroyed, his future uncertain. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction at his downfall, but another part recognized the genuine remorse in his voice, the way grief and guilt had twisted together to create the circumstances that had led to this moment. I need to schedule the gallbladder surgery as soon as possible, I said, forcing myself to focus on the practical next steps. With someone else, obviously, someone I can trust. Dr. Martinez has already identified several excellent surgeons who could handle your case. Dr. Webb said quietly. She's been preparing for this conversation, making sure you would have options for follow-up care. Again, Dr. Martinez, the unknown guardian angel who had been working behind the scenes to ensure I received the care I deserved. I made a mental note to send her flowers along with my thanks. As we prepared to leave, Dr. Webb stood and walked around his desk. For a moment, I thought he might try to shake my hand or offer some final platitude about being sorry for what had happened. Instead, he simply stood there, looking older and more fragile than when we had first entered his office. "Catherine," he said as I reached for the door handle again. "I know this doesn't change anything, but I want you to know that I think about you every day, about what I took from you, what I put you through. Margaret used to say that the measure of a person isn't whether they make mistakes, but how they handle the aftermath. I failed that test completely." I paused, my hand on the cool metal of the handle, and turned back to look at him one final time. "Your wife was right about that, but it's not too late to start handling the aftermath better." Make sure this never happens to anyone else. As we left his office and walked down the sterile hospital corridor, David and I moved in silence, both of us processing the emotional whiplash of the last hour. The revelation about Dr. Webb's wife had complicated my feelings about his betrayal, adding layers of human tragedy to what had seemed like simple medical malpractice. But as we reached the elevator, David voiced the question that had been growing in my mind since Dr. Webb mentioned Dr. Martinez's investigation. "Catherine," he said quietly, "if Dr. Martinez has been asking questions for weeks, and if she knew enough to identify surgeons for your follow-up care, how much more does she know about what happened? And why did it take her so long to force Dr. Webb to tell you the truth?" The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, but I didn't step inside. Because David was right to be suspicious, and I was beginning to realize that Dr. Webb's confession might not have been the end of our search for answers. It might have been just the beginning. I let the elevator doors close without us, my mind racing through the implications of David's observation. We stood in the empty hallway, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, while I tried to piece together a timeline that was becoming increasingly troubling. "You're right," I said finally. "If Dr. Martinez knew enough to have surgeons lined up for me, she's known about this for a while. The question is why she waited so long to act." David pulled out his phone and started scrolling through something. "Remember when you first started having those gallbladder attacks? That was 6 weeks ago? And Dr. Webb said Dr. Martinez has been investigating for weeks." The timeline was starting to make me uncomfortable. I had been suffering, making multiple trips to the emergency room, dealing with increasing pain and complications, while someone who apparently knew the truth had remained silent. "Maybe she needed time to build a case," I offered, though even as I said it, the explanation felt weak. "Medical politics can be complicated." "Or maybe she was covering her own involvement somehow," David said, his voice taking on the edge it got when he was working through a problem at his engineering firm. "Think about it, Catherine. She's the one who recommended Dr. Webb to you in the first place." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's aggressive air conditioning. David was right again. Dr. Martinez had been my primary care physician for 3 years, and when I had initially complained about abdominal pain, she was the one who had referred me to Dr. Webb for what she suspected might be gallbladder issues. "We need to talk to her," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "Not tomorrow, not next week, today." David nodded and was already pulling up the medical center's directory on his phone. "Her office is 2 floors down. Internal medicine wing." As we walked toward the stairwell, I found myself thinking about all the interactions I had had with Dr. Martinez over the past few weeks. The way she had seemed unusually concerned during my follow-up appointments. How she had asked detailed questions about my recovery that had seemed thorough at the time, but now felt almost investigative. The way she had avoided making direct eye contact when I described my ongoing symptoms. "David," I said as we reached the stairwell door, "what if Dr. Martinez knew something was wrong from the beginning? What if she suspected Dr. Webb had made a mistake during my surgery, but waited to see how bad my condition would get before she acted?" The thought made me feel sick in a way that had nothing to do with my gallbladder problems. The idea that my suffering might have been prolonged unnecessarily, that someone with the power to help me had chosen to wait and watch instead, was almost worse than the original surgical error. We descended the stairs in silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts about what we might discover. When we reached the internal medicine floor, the atmosphere felt different from the administrative wing we had just left. This was where active patient care happened, where people came seeking help and healing. The irony was not lost on me. Dr. Martinez's office was at the end of a long corridor lined with examination rooms. Through the glass partition, I could see her at her desk, typing notes into a computer. She looked up as we approached, and I saw something flicker across her face that might have been resignation or relief. She buzzed us in immediately, as if she had been expecting us. "Catherine," she said, standing up from her desk. "I was wondering when you would come to see me." The casual tone of her greeting, as if this was a routine follow-up appointment rather than a confrontation about medical negligence, set my teeth on edge. "You were wondering?" I repeated. "Dr. Martinez, I just came from a meeting with Dr. Webb. He told me that you've been investigating my case for weeks, that you knew he had removed the wrong organ." She gestured for us to sit in the chairs across from her desk, but I remained standing. David positioned himself slightly behind me, a silent show of support that I appreciated more than I could express. "Yes," she said simply. "I suspected something was wrong almost immediately after your surgery. Your symptoms didn't match what I would expect from a successful appendectomy, and they were getting worse instead of better." "Then why didn't you tell me?" The question came out sharper than I had intended, but I was past the point of polite medical consultation. "Why did you let me suffer for weeks when you knew what was wrong?" Dr. Martinez sat back down heavily, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked every one of her 60-something years. "Because I needed proof, Catherine. Suspicion isn't enough to accuse a colleague of surgical malpractice. I needed documentation, second opinions, a clear trail of evidence that would hold up under scrutiny." "While I was in pain," I said flatly. "While you were in pain," she acknowledged. "And I know how that sounds. I know how it makes me look. But Catherine, if I had come forward with just suspicions, Dr. Webb could have buried this, made it disappear. You would never have gotten answers, never gotten proper treatment, and he could have done the same thing to someone else." David stepped forward slightly. "So you used Catherine as bait? Let her condition deteriorate while you built your case?" The accusation hung in the air between us, and I watched Dr. Martinez's face carefully for her response. Because David had articulated exactly what I was thinking, and her answer would determine whether I could ever trust her again. "I expedited every test I could justify," she said quietly. "I monitored you as closely as possible without raising suspicions. And I had backup plans in place in case your condition became life-threatening." "Backup plans?" I felt my voice rising. "My condition was already life-threatening. I've been to the emergency room 4 times in the past month." Dr. Martinez opened a thick file on her desk, and I could see that it was filled with test results, consultation notes, and what looked like correspondence with other physicians. "Catherine, what I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear," But you need to understand the full scope of what Dr. Webb did and why it was so important that I handle this carefully. She looked up at me with an expression that was part apology, part warning. Your case isn't the first time Dr. Webb has made this kind of mistake. And if I had moved too quickly, the other victims might never have gotten justice. The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the arms of my chair, feeling the room tilt slightly as the implications sank in. Other victims? David's voice was deadly quiet. I had heard that tone from him before, usually when he was trying very hard not to lose his temper completely. Dr. Martinez nodded grimly. 3 that I've been able to confirm so far, all within the past 18 months. All presenting with post-surgical complications that didn't match their supposed procedures. I found my voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Are they all okay? 2 are recovering now that they've received proper treatment. The 3rd... She paused, choosing her words carefully. The 3rd patient didn't make it. By the time the family realized something was wrong, the damage was too extensive. The silence in the room was suffocating. I could hear David's breathing, sharp and controlled, and somewhere in the building, the distant hum of medical equipment. But all I could think about was some other family, sitting in a room like this, getting news that was so much worse than what I was hearing. That's why you needed documentation, I said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. If you had just treated me and said nothing, he could have kept doing this to other people. Exactly. Dr. Martinez leaned forward, her expression intense. Catherine, I need you to know that every day I didn't tell you the truth was agony for me. I watched you suffer. I saw the fear in your eyes during every appointment, and I hated myself for it. But if I had acted too soon, Dr. Webb would have found a way to cover this up. He has influence at this hospital, connections that go back decades. David had been pacing behind my chair, but now he stopped. So what happens now? You have your documentation. What's the next step? I've already filed a formal complaint with the medical board. The hospital administration has been notified, and there's going to be a full investigation into all of Dr. Webb's recent surgeries. He's been suspended pending the outcome. I felt a strange mix of relief and anger. Relief that something was finally being done, but anger that it had taken so long, that I had been kept in the dark while my body fought against the wrong kind of healing. I need to ask you something, I said, looking directly at Dr. Martinez. During all those weeks when I was calling your office, when I was in the emergency room, when I was crying from pain that nobody could explain, did you ever consider just telling me the truth? She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her weighing her answer. Finally, she said, every single day, especially after your 3rd ER visit, I came very close to telling you then. What stopped you? Fear, she admitted. Fear that I was wrong, even though I knew I wasn't. Fear that speaking up too soon would let him escape consequences. And fear that if you knew the truth, you might do something that would compromise the investigation. David made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a snort. Like what? Sue him? Report him? Isn't that exactly what should happen? Yes, but timing matters. If Catherine had filed a lawsuit before I had solid evidence, Dr. Webb's lawyers could have argued that her symptoms were psychosomatic, that she was looking for someone to blame for normal post-surgical complications. With multiple victims and clear documentation, that defense becomes impossible. I understood the logic, but it didn't make the betrayal feel any less sharp. You made that choice for me. You decided that I didn't get to know what was happening to my own body, because it might interfere with your investigation. Yes, she said simply. I did, and I will regret that for the rest of my career. But Catherine, I would make the same choice again if it meant stopping him from hurting more people. The honesty was brutal, but I found myself respecting her for it. At least she wasn't trying to dress up her decision as something noble. She had used me, and she was admitting it. David sat down in the chair next to mine, and I could feel the tension radiating from him. So, what does this mean for Catherine's recovery? How do we fix what he did? Dr. Martinez turned to a different section of the file. The good news is that Catherine is young and otherwise healthy. The surgery to correct Dr. Webb's mistake is more complex than a standard appendectomy, but it's definitely doable. I've already consulted with one of the best surgeons in the state, and she's agreed to take Catherine's case. Another surgery, I said, the words feeling heavy in my mouth. After everything I've been through, I have to go through it again. I know it's not what you want to hear, but Catherine, without this surgery, your symptoms are only going to get worse, and there are potential complications down the road that we need to prevent. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, everything that was still to come. When I opened them again, I found Dr. Martinez watching me with an expression that was part professional concern, part personal guilt. There's something else, she said quietly. Something you need to know before you decide how you want to proceed. David's hand found mine, his fingers intertwining with mine in a grip that was almost painful. I could feel his pulse racing through his wrist, matching the sudden acceleration of my own heartbeat. The fluorescent lights above us hummed with a low, persistent buzz that seemed to grow louder in the silence that followed Dr. Martinez's words. What else? I asked, though part of me wanted to cover my ears and pretend I hadn't heard her. The vinyl chair beneath me creaked as I shifted forward, my body instinctively preparing for another blow. What else could there possibly be? Dr. Martinez's office suddenly felt impossibly small. The diplomas on her walls, which had initially impressed me, now seemed to mock the situation we found ourselves in. Here was someone with all the right credentials, all the proper training, telling me that my nightmare was far from over. Dr. Webb didn't just make one mistake during your surgery, she said, her voice carefully measured. The investigation has revealed that he was under the influence of prescription medication during your procedure. Medication that he wasn't supposed to be taking while performing surgery. The words hit me like a physical force. I felt David's grip tighten on my hand, heard his sharp intake of breath, but everything seemed to be happening from a great distance. The room tilted slightly, and I gripped the armrest of my chair to steady myself. He was high, I said, the words coming out flat and emotionless. During my surgery, he was high. The medication was prescribed for a back injury he'd sustained several months earlier, but the dosage found in his system was well beyond therapeutic levels, and the combination with other substances created significant impairment. David stood up so abruptly that his chair rolled backward and hit the wall with a soft thud. He began pacing the small space behind our chairs, his footsteps muffled by the thin carpet. I could hear his breathing, quick and shallow, and knew he was fighting to control his temper. How long have you known this? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The toxicology results came back 3 weeks ago, but we needed time to verify the findings, to make sure there were no errors in the testing process. I watched David's reflection in the dark window behind Dr. Martinez's desk. His face was flushed, his jaw clenched so tightly I worried he might crack a tooth. In all our years together, I had rarely seen him this angry. Even during our worst fights, even when we were both exhausted and saying things we didn't mean, he had never looked like this. 3 weeks, he repeated. 3 weeks you've known that my wife was butchered by a doctor who was too high to tell the difference between an appendix and whatever the hell he actually removed. David, I said softly, but he didn't seem to hear me. 3 more weeks of watching her suffer, watching her blame herself for not healing properly, watching her cry in the bathroom when she thought I couldn't hear. His voice cracked on the last words, and I felt something break inside my chest. I hadn't realized he knew about the crying. I had been so careful, always waiting until he was asleep or out of the house, always making sure to wash my face and compose myself before facing him again. The thought that he had been carrying that knowledge, that worry, made everything feel infinitely worse. Dr. Martinez remained seated, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. I understand your anger. Both of you have every right to be furious, but the investigation had to be thorough. If we had moved too quickly, if there had been any procedural errors, Dr. Webb's lawyers could have gotten the evidence thrown out. And what about Catherine's rights? David asked, finally stopping his pacing to face her directly. What about her right to know what was done to her? What about her right to make informed decisions about her own medical care? The question hung in the air between us, heavy and accusatory. I found myself thinking about all the appointments I had endured over the past months, all the times I had sat in examination rooms similar to this one, describing my symptoms to doctors who nodded sympathetically while secretly knowing exactly what was wrong with me. You're right, Dr. Martinez said finally. Catherine's rights were violated, not just by Dr. Webb, but by the system that chose to protect the investigation over protecting her autonomy as a patient. The admission was startling in its directness. I had expected more deflection, more careful legal language designed to minimize liability. Instead, she was acknowledging something that went beyond medical malpractice into something that felt more personal, more fundamentally wrong. The surgery to fix what he did? I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. How dangerous is it? Dr. Martinez turned back to her file, flipping through several pages before finding what she was looking for. Every surgery carries risks, but Dr. Sarah Chen, the surgeon I mentioned, has performed this type of corrective procedure many times. Her success rate is excellent. That's not what I asked. I could feel something hardening inside me, a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. I asked how dangerous it is. I want the truth, not the sanitized version you think I can handle. She met my eyes directly, and I saw a flicker of what might have been respect cross her face. There's a 15% chance of complications. Most of those would be minor infections, delayed healing, that sort of thing. But there's a small possibility of more serious problems. Damage to surrounding organs, issues with anesthesia, bleeding that requires additional intervention. And if I don't have the surgery, your symptoms will continue to worsen. The pain will become more severe and more frequent. Eventually, you'll develop complications that will require emergency surgery, which would be far more dangerous than the planned procedure. David had stopped pacing and was standing behind my chair now. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with the sharp odor of stress sweat. His hands came to rest on my shoulders, and I leaned back against his warmth. There's something else you need to consider, Dr. Martinez continued, her voice taking on a different tone. Something that affects your decision about how to proceed. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar wave of exhaustion that had become my constant companion over the past months. How could there possibly be more? How many revelations could one person absorb before simply shutting down completely? Dr. Webb isn't the only one, she said quietly. The investigation has uncovered evidence that this has been happening for months, possibly longer. There are at least 6 other patients who received substandard care while he was impaired. The room seemed to spin around me. 6 other people, 6 other families sitting in rooms like this one, learning that their trust had been violated in the most fundamental way possible. 6 other people whose bodies bore the permanent marks of one man's addiction and recklessness. Are they all going to be okay? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Dr. Martinez was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence, I understood that not everyone had been as fortunate as I had been. Whatever Dr. Webb had done to me, however much pain and confusion he had caused, there were others who had suffered worse. The hospital is prepared to offer you a settlement, she said, changing the subject in a way that felt abrupt and jarring. A substantial one, enough to cover all your medical expenses, lost wages, and compensation for pain and suffering. In exchange for what? David asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. A non-disclosure agreement. You would agree not to discuss the details of your case publicly or with other potential victims. The words hit me like a slap. After everything they had put me through, after months of lies and manipulation, they wanted to buy my silence. They wanted to hand me a check and send me away quietly, leaving other patients vulnerable to doctors like Webb. But there was something else in Dr. Martinez's voice, something that made me look at her more carefully. Her expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes were telling a different story. She was warning me about something, giving me information I needed to make an informed decision. What happens if I don't sign? I asked. Then you're free to pursue whatever legal action you choose. You can speak to reporters, join with other victims, do whatever you feel is necessary to hold the hospital accountable. The choice was clear, but the implications were staggering. Take the money and stay silent, or fight back and risk everything in a legal battle that could drag on for years. Either way, my life would never be the same. David's hands tightened on my shoulders. Catherine, he said softly, whatever you decide, I'm with you. But you need to know that if you choose to fight this, it's going to get much worse before it gets better. I nodded, understanding the weight of what he was telling me. But as I sat there in that sterile office, surrounded by the evidence of one man's betrayal and the system that had protected him, I realized that some fights were worth having, regardless of the cost. I need to ask you something, I said to Dr. Martinez, my voice steadier than I felt. And I need you to be completely honest with me. She nodded, waiting. Are there other doctors like Webb still practicing at this hospital? Dr. Martinez's face went very still, and for a moment I thought she wasn't going to answer. She glanced toward the door, then back at me, and I could see her weighing her words carefully. That's a complicated question, she said finally. No, it's not, David interjected, his voice harder than I'd ever heard it. Either there are other doctors putting patients at risk, or there aren't. Dr. Martinez sighed deeply, and suddenly she looked exhausted. The hospital has initiated a comprehensive review of all surgical procedures from the past 5 years. We're looking at outcomes, patient complaints, any irregularities in documentation. That's not what I asked, I pressed. I asked if there are other doctors like Webb still practicing here right now. She was quiet for so long that I began to think she wouldn't answer at all. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Dr. Webb wasn't working alone, she said. The falsified records, the cover-ups, the manipulation of patient files, it would have required assistance from other staff members. Nurses, administrators, possibly other physicians. The room felt like it was spinning. David reached for my hand, and I gripped it tightly, needing something solid to hold on to. "How many others?" David asked. "We're still investigating, but Catherine, you need to understand something." Dr. Martinez leaned forward, her professional mask slipping completely. "The people involved in this, they have a lot to lose. Careers, reputations, potentially criminal charges. If you choose to fight this publicly, you're not just going up against one rogue doctor. You're threatening an entire network of people who have been protecting each other for years." "Are you trying to scare me into taking the settlement?" I asked. "I'm trying to make sure you understand what you're up against," she replied. "Because once you make this choice, there's no going back. If you sign the NDA, you walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else, get the best medical care, never have to worry about this again. If you don't sign it..." "If I don't sign it, what?" I demanded. Dr. Martinez looked directly at me, and I saw something in her eyes that chilled me to the bone. "If you don't sign it, they'll destroy you. They'll claim you're lying, that you're mentally unstable, that you're just looking for money. They'll drag your medical history through the courts, question every decision you've ever made, paint you as an unreliable witness who can't be trusted." David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is insane. You're talking about a criminal conspiracy, and you're sitting here acting like it's just business as usual." "I'm trying to help Catherine make an informed decision," Dr. Martinez said, but her voice lacked conviction. "No," I said quietly, and both of them turned to look at me. "You're trying to help the hospital minimize their liability. You're trying to make this problem go away as quietly as possible." Dr. Martinez didn't deny it, which was answer enough. "But you're also trying to warn me," I continued. "You're telling me things you probably shouldn't be telling me." "Why?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her hands. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Because I've seen what they do to people who fight back," she said. "And I've seen what happens to patients when doctors like Webb are allowed to continue practicing. Neither outcome is pretty." "So, what would you do?" I asked. "If you were in my position, what would you choose?" "I can't answer that for you," she said. "But I can tell you this. Whatever you decide, you need to be prepared for the consequences. If you take the settlement, you'll always wonder if you could have prevented other patients from going through what you went through. If you fight, you'll spend years of your life in courtrooms and depositions, reliving the worst experience of your life over and over again." David sat back down, his anger seeming to deflate into something closer to despair. "There has to be another way, some middle ground." "Like what?" Dr. Martinez asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "But Catherine shouldn't have to choose between her own well-being and protecting other patients. That's not fair." "Fair?" Dr. Martinez let out a bitter laugh. "Nothing about this situation is fair. A woman came in for routine surgery and ended up as a victim of medical malpractice and fraud. There's nothing fair about any of it." I felt something shifting inside me as I listened to them talk. The fear was still there, the uncertainty about what lay ahead, but underneath it was something else. Something that felt like clarity. "I need to ask you one more question," I said to Dr. Martinez. "And I need you to be completely honest with me." She nodded. "If I take the settlement and sign the NDA, will that make it harder for other victims to come forward? Will it make it easier for the hospital to cover this up?" Dr. Martinez closed her eyes, and when she opened them, I could see the answer written across her face. "Yes," she said simply. "It will." The silence that followed felt heavy with the weight of that admission. I looked at David, saw the mixture of fear and pride in his expression, and knew that he would support whatever decision I made. How long do I have to decide? I asked. The offer is good for 72 hours, Dr. Martinez said. After that, the hospital will assume you're declining the settlement and will begin preparing their legal defense. And if I decide to fight, what's my first step? Dr. Martinez hesitated, then reached into her briefcase and pulled out a business card. She slid it across the table to me. This is the attorney who represented the last patient who tried to take on this hospital, she said. She lost her case, but she might be able to give you some insight into what you're facing. I picked up the card, noting the name and phone number. Why are you helping me? Because, Dr. Martinez said, standing up and gathering her papers. Someone needs to stop them before they hurt anyone else. As she reached the door, she turned back one more time. Catherine, whatever you decide, be very careful who you trust. This conspiracy goes deeper than you know, and some of the people who seem like allies might not be what they appear. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving David and me alone with the business card and the weight of an impossible choice. What do you think she meant by that last part? David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I stared at the business card in my hands, Dr. Martinez's warning echoing in my mind, and realized that nothing about this situation was as simple as it had seemed. If she was right, if this conspiracy really did run as deep as she suggested, then even the people trying to help me might have their own hidden agendas. The question was, who could I trust when everyone seemed to have something to hide? I spent the next hour staring at that business card, turning it over in my hands while David made us both tea we didn't drink. The silence between us felt different now, charged with the weight of Dr. Martinez's warning about trust. I keep thinking about what she said. I finally spoke, my voice hoarse. About being careful who I trust. What if she's right? What if there are people involved in this that we don't even know about? David sat down across from me, his face drawn with exhaustion. Catherine, you can't start doubting everyone. That's exactly what they want, for you to feel isolated and paranoid. But what if I'm not being paranoid enough? I set the card down and looked at him directly. What if Dr. Chen knew more than he let on? What if someone told him to remove my kidney instead of my appendix? That's a pretty serious accusation. This whole situation is pretty serious. I picked up the card again. Maybe I should call this attorney Dr. Martinez mentioned, the one who lost her case against the hospital. David frowned. I don't know if that's a good idea. If she lost, what can she really tell you that would help? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Dr. Chen's name appeared on the screen, and my stomach clenched. I hadn't spoken to him since that awful conversation in the hospital room where he'd tried to minimize what happened. Should I answer it? I asked David. It's your choice, but maybe you should hear what he has to say. I accepted the call, putting it on speaker so David could listen. Catherine, I'm glad you answered. Dr. Chen's voice sounded strained, different from the confident surgeon I remembered. I need to talk to you about something important. Can we meet? I don't think that's appropriate right now, I said carefully. My attorney advised me not to have direct contact with anyone from the hospital. This isn't about the hospital. This is about your safety. His voice dropped lower. There are things you don't understand about what happened to you. Things that go beyond a simple surgical error. David and I exchanged glances. This was exactly what Dr. Martinez had warned us about. What kind of things? I asked. I can't discuss it over the phone, but Catherine, you need to be very careful about who you trust. That attorney who came to see you today. She's not who she claims to be. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? Meet me tomorrow morning at the coffee shop on 5th Street, the one near the park. Come alone, and don't tell anyone where you're going. Your life might depend on it. The line went dead, leaving David and me staring at each other in stunned silence. This is insane, David said, running his hands through his hair. First, Dr. Martinez tells you not to trust anyone. Now Dr. Chen is saying the same thing about her. How are we supposed to know who's telling the truth? I felt like I was drowning in a sea of conflicting information and hidden motives. Maybe that's the point. Maybe they want me so confused and scared that I just take the settlement and disappear? Or maybe one of them is genuinely trying to help you, and the other is trying to silence you. I stood up and began pacing around the small kitchen. But which is which? Dr. Martinez seemed so sincere, so concerned about other victims. But what if that was all an act? What if the hospital sent her to manipulate me into taking the settlement? And Dr. Chen? David asked. The man who actually removed your kidney by mistake? Why would we trust anything he says? Because maybe he didn't make a mistake. The words came out before I could stop them, and once they were spoken, I couldn't take them back. What if someone told him to do it? What if he's feeling guilty and wants to come clean? David stared at me. You really think someone deliberately had your kidney removed? I don't know what to think anymore. I sank back into my chair, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I was facing. All I know is that nothing about this feels right. The hospital's reaction, the quick settlement offer, Dr. Martinez's warnings, and now Dr. Chen calling with cryptic messages about my safety. We sat in silence for several minutes, both lost in our own thoughts. Finally, David spoke. What if we're approaching this all wrong? What if instead of trying to figure out who to trust, we focus on finding the truth ourselves? How do we do that? We start with facts. Medical records, hospital protocols, anything we can get our hands on that doesn't depend on what someone tells us. David's voice grew stronger as he warmed to the idea. We can't trust what people say, but documents don't lie. It was the first thing that had made sense all day. You're right, but how do we get access to that kind of information? I have an idea, but you're not going to like it. I looked at him warily. What kind of idea? We go to that meeting with Dr. Chen tomorrow. But we don't go alone, and we don't go unprepared. David leaned forward, his expression intense. We record everything he says, and we use it to get to the truth. David, that sounds dangerous. What if Dr. Martinez was right about not trusting him? Then we'll find out. But Catherine, sitting here trying to guess who's lying isn't getting us anywhere. We need to take action. I thought about the settlement offer, about the 72 hours I had to decide, about all the other potential victims Dr. Martinez had mentioned. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something else now. Anger, determination. Okay, I said finally. We'll meet with Dr. Chen, but if we're going to do this, we need to be smart about it. As we began planning for tomorrow's meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to cross a line from which there would be no return. Whatever Dr. Chen wanted to tell me, whatever truth lay hidden beneath the surface of this conspiracy, I had a feeling that once I knew it, my life would never be the same. The question was I ready for that kind of truth? The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I'd barely slept, my mind cycling through every possible scenario of what Dr. Chen might tell us. David had insisted on staying over, camping out on my couch with a determination that would have been touching under different circumstances. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked over coffee, his voice still rough from sleep. "No," I admitted, staring into my mug. "But I'm sure I can't keep living in limbo. Whatever he has to say, I need to hear it." David nodded and pulled out his phone, checking the recording app he'd downloaded. "I've tested this 3 times. It'll pick up everything clearly as long as we keep it close." "What if he finds out we're recording?" "Then we'll deal with that when it happens." David's jaw was set in that stubborn way I remembered from childhood arguments. "Catherine, we can't go in there completely defenseless." The meeting was set for 2 o'clock at a small coffee shop downtown, neutral territory that Dr. Chen had suggested. As we drove there, I found myself gripping the door handle so tightly my knuckles went white. "He's already there," David murmured as we approached the shop. Through the window, I could see Dr. Chen sitting alone at a corner table, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup like he was trying to warm himself. Inside, the shop was nearly empty except for a barista wiping down tables. Dr. Chen looked up as we approached, and I was struck by how different he appeared from the confident surgeon I'd met before my operation. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed with what looked like sleepless nights. "Catherine," he said, standing as we reached his table. "Thank you for coming." "And you brought—" "My brother David," I said, not offering any explanation for his presence. Dr. Chen nodded and gestured for us to sit. "I wasn't sure you'd come after what happened yesterday." "Dr. Martinez told me not to trust you," I said directly, watching his face for a reaction. Something flickered in his eyes, disappointment maybe, or resignation. "I suppose I can't blame her for that. What I'm about to tell you, it's going to be hard to believe." David leaned forward slightly, and I knew he was positioning his phone to catch every word. "Why don't you start from the beginning, Dr. Chen?" The surgeon took a long sip of his coffee, as if gathering courage. "The surgery on your appendix was routine, Catherine. Textbook even. But when I opened you up, I found something else. Something that wasn't supposed to be there." "What do you mean?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. "Your kidney showed signs of early-stage disease. Very early. The kind that wouldn't show up on standard scans for months, maybe years." Dr. Chen's hands were trembling slightly as he set down his cup. "But here's the thing that's been keeping me awake at night. The disease markers weren't natural." David and I exchanged glances. "What are you saying exactly?" David asked. "I'm saying someone had been slowly poisoning you, Catherine. The damage to your kidney was consistent with long-term exposure to certain chemicals. Industrial solvents, specifically." The coffee shop seemed to tilt around me. "That's impossible. I don't work with chemicals. I'm an accountant." "I know. That's what made me start digging deeper." Dr. Chen leaned forward, his voice dropping. "I removed your kidney because leaving it in would have killed you within 6 months. But I couldn't put that in my official report because I didn't know who was responsible, and I was afraid for your safety." "So you let everyone think you made a mistake?" David's voice was tight with controlled anger. "I let everyone think I made a mistake because it was safer than the alternative." Dr. Chen's eyes met mine. "Catherine, someone has been systematically trying to kill you. Slowly, carefully, in a way that would look like natural illness when you finally died." The words hit me like physical blows. "Who? Who would do that?" "I don't know, but I have suspicions." Dr. Chen glanced around the nearly empty coffee shop. "The chemical signature suggests someone with access to industrial cleaning supplies. someone who could introduce small amounts into your food or drink over a long period. My mind raced through the possibilities, through the people in my daily life who might have that kind of access. The thought was so horrifying, I could barely process it. "Why are you telling me this now?" David asked. "Why not before?" "Because yesterday I received a call from someone at the hospital. They wanted to know if I'd spoken to Catherine about the real reason for the surgery." Dr. Chen's face was grim. "The only way they could know there was a real reason is if they already knew what I'd found." "You think someone at the hospital is involved?" I managed to ask. "I think someone is getting nervous that you're asking questions instead of just accepting the settlement." Dr. Chen reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. "These are copies of all the lab work I had done on your kidney tissue. Independent analysis, done at a private lab under a false name." David took the envelope, his hands steady even though mine were shaking. "What do you want Catherine to do with this?" "I want her to take it to the police. But more than that, I want her to be very, very careful about who she trusts." Dr. Chen stood up, leaving money on the table for his coffee. "Someone tried to kill you once, Catherine. Now that they know their plan failed, they might try a more direct approach." "Wait!" I called out as he started to leave. "Dr. Martinez warned me not to trust you. She said there were other victims." Dr. Chen paused, his back still to us. "Elena Martinez is a good doctor and a good person, but she's also scared. We all are." He turned back to face me. "As for other victims, I can't prove anything. But there have been 3 other cases in the past 2 years. Patients who came in for routine procedures and ended up with organs removed due to unexpected findings. All 3 died within 18 months of complications." The implication hung in the air like a poison cloud. "Dr. Chen," David said quietly, "if what you're saying is true, why haven't you gone to the police yourself?" "Because I'm the surgeon who removed a healthy organ, Mr. David. Who's going to believe me when I claim it was actually to save her life?" Dr. Chen's smile was bitter. "No, this has to come from Catherine. She's the victim. She's the one with credibility." After he left, David and I sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Finally, David opened the envelope and began scanning the documents inside. "Catherine," he said, his voice strange. "These lab results, they're detailed, very detailed, and they support everything he just told us." I stared at the papers, the technical language blurring before my eyes. "So someone really was trying to kill me?" "It looks that way. But who and why?" The questions felt surreal, like something from a movie rather than my actual life. David was quiet for a long moment, studying the documents. "Catherine, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." "What?" "In the months before your surgery, did you notice anything different? Feeling sick more often? Tired? Anything that seemed unusual?" I thought back, trying to remember. I had been feeling run down. My doctor said it was stress from work, and I'd been having stomach problems, but I thought that was just... The realization hit me like a lightning bolt. "Oh my God," I whispered. "David, I know who it was.